Several years ago, I attended a conference in Indianapolis, and there was an option to tour the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Even though I've never watched racing, I thought I should take advantage of the opportunity to tour a site that is so important to so many people. I knew that many people travel great distances to not only see races there, but also to see the place that is so important to racing. I found it mildly interesting. But what interested me most was how it was so important to so many of the people touring there that day, while it held little meaning for me. I recognized that I would have to become a racing fan in order to have the same passion about visiting that place as those around me reflected that day. And I suspect that some of the people around me that day thought I was rather ungracious because it didn't excite me in the way that it excited them. While I recognize that it may be asking too much of Methodists to exude excitement and passion when we gather for worship, I want to invite us to consider what it is that we really love, because we are what we love. We all know that the right answer is supposed to be God. But just because we know the right answer doesn't mean that we've really addressed the question. When I was in seminary and in my early days of teaching religious studies, I used a small book by the great German theologian Paul Tillich entitled Dynamics of Faith. Now, I only understood about 2 sentences every few pages. And when my students complained about how difficult it was to understand Tillich, I acknowledged that it was hard and that there was much that I didn't understand, but that what little I understood made it worth sticking with it. I told the students that reading much of the Bible is the same, that there's a lot that I don't understand, but that what I did understand was more than enough to challenge me. When Lauren was preparing her sermon last week on Esther, Tim Bernison, who's here in worship this morning, wrote her an email about an experience that he had with the book of Esther during his college days. Tim shared, "Patty and I are graduates of Gettysburg College, which is a small liberal arts college affiliated with the Lutheran Church. The school required students to take at least one religion course in order to graduate. The school also had a January term where students took one class. Some students took the January term very seriously and chose extremely difficult, intensive courses. Others often chose a class that fulfilled a graduation requirement, and some looked for a course that didn't require much effort. Aside from academics, there were plenty of parties that month too. So the easier the course, the more time to party. Among the courses available to students in 1975 was one offered in the religion department called the Book of Esther. A bunch of my fraternity brothers were sitting around trying to figure out what course to take and saw that one in the catalog. One of the brothers opened up a Bible, perhaps for the first time, and noticed that the book of Esther was only a few pages long. "Hey guys," he said, "look at this. Just a few pages. How hard could this be?" The others took a look and agreed. This was going to be a piece of cake. You could complete the required course reading in a matter of minutes, sit through one class a day for a couple of hours, and have plenty of time to party. And at the same time, the course fulfilled the religion course requirement needed for graduation. So a group of about 7 of them signed up for the course. After the first day of class, there was some grumbling from the group that perhaps their course selection was not the best choice. After a week, the group was quite dismayed that they didn't have as much free time available to party as they had originally predicted. After 2 weeks, they were concerned that they weren't going to finish the paper required by the course curriculum. They were spending most of their evenings together trying to figure out the biblical text and then arguing with each other rather than partying. By the end of January 1975, most had lost sleep and were pulling their hair out. So much for breezing through the book of Esther. As for me, I fortunately didn't take that class and had a really enjoyable month. Religion, despite what we want to believe, isn't necessarily easy or makes us comfortable, but rarely is anything that ultimately brings us true satisfaction. When I was making my students read Tillich, one of the phrases that I had them struggle with is one that I want to invite you to struggle with, and it is Tillich's definition of religion, which he characterized as whatever constitutes our ultimate concern. As you contemplate the notion of what your ultimate concern is, I want to suggest that our scripture reading supports this kind of self-examination. Proverbs 4:23 instructs us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. You will recall that Jesus talked about it's not what goes into a person that defiles a person, but rather what resides in those deepest places within us. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these defile you. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile you. Thus, I think this is the reason that the Apostle Paul instructed the Philippians to focus on whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on such things. My observation is that we typically do the opposite. Most news networks give us a review of the very worst of humanity and the world, and then right at the end of the broadcast, they give a 2-minute report on something positive or uplifting. After over 28 minutes of negativity and advertising that plays on our fears and insecurities, 2 minutes of hope is not enough. I'm fearful that I can do the same in worship if I'm not careful and intentional. It's easy to talk about what's wrong with the world. There's no shortage of material. The challenge, not only for me, but for all of us, is to stay focused on the hope we have in God, and make that our ultimate concern. The notion of religion as our ultimate concern, as I understand it, means that all that we do and all that we are is ultimately grounded in our understanding of God as we come to know God as people who follow Jesus Christ. It's a matter of taking who we are and what we do and striving to have it serve what is true and noble and right and lovely. For those of you who will go over to Milano's after the service, look up from the cash register today and you'll see two icons. One's the familiar Madonna and Child, and the other one is Euphrosynius the cook. Euphrosynius was born in a humble family in Alexandria in the 9th century. Desiring an anonymous monastic life, he entered a monastery in Palestine. His obedience was to cook for the brethren. And while doing so, he prayed constantly. He increased in holiness and virtue, but concealed this from his fellow monks. On one occasion, a priest of the monastery asked the Lord to reveal the future paradise to him. And so in a dream, he saw the beauty and joy promised to the righteous. He also saw the cook Euphrosynius there, and amazed, he asked him how this could be. The cook explained that through the mercy of God, he was always in paradise. He gave the priest 3 apples from the garden, and the priest awoke. Thinking that it was all a dream, he was startled to find the apples beside him. He found Euphrosynius and asked him where he had been. And he said, "The same place you have been." The priest went to tell the others in the monastery everything that had happened. Wanting to pay tribute to the cook, they went to the kitchen. But Euphrosynius was gone. He concealed himself in the wilderness and was never seen again. The brothers in the monastery kept him in remembrance, knowing that he already dwelt in paradise. This story suggests that God can be reflected in the kitchen if we have made Jesus Christ our ultimate concern. The next time you start to complain about having to work in the kitchen, remember Euphrosynius, who was always in paradise, even in the kitchen. So what if you're not ready to see the kitchen as paradise? Let me share a story that I've used in nursing homes when I've been asked to lead worship there. You know, nursing homes can be one of the most challenging places to preach because there's no pretense in a nursing home. Life has gotten stripped down to what is really real and true. This story was recorded by Joan Bramish, who wrote, "I once taught in a small private school located within the charming confines of a 3-story stone mansion. Each morning at 9 o'clock, all the students gathered in the great room for a metaphysical warm-up in preparation for the day. 53 children, ranging in age from 3 to 7 years, sat on child-sized colorful chairs or in sun-flooded patterns on thick carpet. Each bright face was illuminated by positive thoughts and feelings as he or she eagerly anticipated the morning's songs, meditations, and explorations into yet another metaphysical cranny of the mind. One morning, the headmistress made an announcement to all the children gathered. Today, we begin a great experiment of the mind, your mind. She held up 2 small ivy plants, each potted in an identical container. Here we have 2 plants, she continued. Do they look the same? All the children nodded solemnly. So did I, for in this way I was also a child. We will give the plants the same amount of light, the same amount of water, but not the same amount of attention, she said. Together, we're going to see what will happen when we put one plant in the kitchen on the counter away from our attention, and the other plant right here in this room on the mantle. She placed one plant on the white wooden ledge, then led the children en masse to the kitchen, where she sat the other plant on the white counter. After which she led the parade of wide-eyed youngsters back to their places in the great room. Each day for the next month, we shall sing to our plant on the mantle. We will tell it with words how much we love it, how beautiful it is. We will use our good minds to think good thoughts about this plant. One of the smallest children jumped to her feet. But ma'am, what about the plant out there? She pointed a stubby finger toward the kitchen. The headmistress smiled at all of her charges. We will use the kitchen plant as the control in our great experiment. How do you think it will work? We won't speak to it, not even a whisper. We won't send it any good thoughts. That's right. And then we'll see what happens. 4 weeks later, my novice eyes were as wide and disbelieving as the children's. The kitchen plant was leggy and sick-looking, and it hadn't grown at all. But the great room plant, which had been sung to and swaddled in positive thoughts and words, had increased threefold in size, with dark, succulent leaves that fairly vibrated with energy when addressed with song, word, or thought. In order to prove the experiment, and also dry the tears of the tender-hearted among us who feared for the life of the other plant, the kitchen ivy was rescued from its solitary confinement and brought to the great room to join the other ivy on the mantle, but at the opposite end. Within 3 weeks, the second plant had caught up with the first ivy. Within 4 weeks, they could not be recognized one from the other. I took this lesson to heart and made it my own. All things grow with love. We are what we love. So let us celebrate God's love for us in the sacrament of Holy Communion so that we may become a little more of who God has created and redeemed us to be.